Welcome and thank you for joining me today. I'm Dr. Bill Schlosser, an ecologist and economist, and for 3 decades I've been working on one core challenge. How do we appraise forest lands in a way that is both credible and defensible? Forest land is not like office buildings or farmland. Its value unfolds across decades, even centuries. Today, I'll introduce you to FRASS, the Forest Resource Analysis System software, which makes this challenge solvable. As you listen, I encourage you to think about the tools you use now and whether they truly reveal the value of forest land. If you'd like to follow along, you can find my publications on foresteconometrics.com under the in-print references. Here, you will find journal articles I have published on some of the tools I will talk about today. These give you insights to make these findings possible and realistic. I'd like to include a bit of history. Since 2005, I've been involved in valuation modeling for entities like Potlatch Corporation, tribal governments in Alaska, the Cobell Settlement, and numerous private acquisitions. Altogether, that's over 45 million acres analyzed and optimized. Why do I share this? Because forest land valuation requires accuracy and precision at a scale most appraisers never encounter until they apply this to forest lands. We're not talking about 10 parcels and a subdivision. No, we're talking about millions of acres with different owners, soils, species, and markets. That experience shapes everything I show you today. The foundation of timberland appraisal is the Income Capitalization Approach. And this is not my opinion. It is appraisal science. The land's value is the present value of its income stream. We forecast revenues, subtract costs, and discount to net present value. That process is defensible, auditable, and replicable. FRASS is built directly on that foundation. From the start, it aligns with the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, USPAP, the standard already recognized across the appraisal profession. Now, how many of you have seen the sales comparison approach used in timberland? Let me be blunt. Comparables don't work in timberland. Why? Well, because no two timber stands are comparable. Different ages, productivity, access, regulations. Trying to force forest lands into a comparable sales is like trying to compare downtown skyscraper with a mobile home. Yeah, sure, they both generate rent, but the underlying dynamics are completely different. If you rely on comparables in timberland, you are almost guaranteed to misstate value. And I will make that clear now. What about the cost approach? Again, it doesn't hold for timberlands. Forest land is not about the cost to plant seedlings or build roads. It's about the perpetual income stream. Revenues will always exceed those initial costs. So, cost does not equal value. That's why, for timberland, only the income capitalization approach truly works. So, what is FRASS? Think of it as an integrated valuation system. It combines forest biometrics, market forecasting, and econometric optimization. In plain terms, FRASS connects what is grown in the woods with what sells in the marketplace, and then applies the mathematical tools of financial discounting to review true value. At its heart, FRASS models timber rotations into perpetuity. It lets us redefine highest and best use in the language of forestry. Rotations, income, and net present value. Let's pause on highest and best use. In most real estate, HBU is a snapshot in time. But forestry is different. Here, HBU is not about today, it's about rotations across decades. I emphasize, forestry is measured in rotations, not years. That is a clock of our business. Timber is a commodity, yeah, but one that only has transparent value when markets have many buyers and many sellers. HBU in forestry is the site's ability to generate income across time, and FRASS measures exactly that. Consider this. Timber valuation means knowing the factory's capacity. Each stand of trees is the production line, but traditional harvest schedules often ignore market cycles. They cut when the trees are big enough, regardless of whether the market is high or low. FRASS corrects this by integrating biometric forecasts with economic optimization. It sees beyond the stand table. It sees cycles, trends, and opportunity. In forestry, we all know growth and yield models like Prognosis or the Forest Vegetation Simulator. They are excellent at describing how trees grow, but they don't optimize economics. They can tell you the board foot, basal area, cubic feet, but they don't tell you profit. FRASS is the bridge. It takes those biological measures, translates them into merchantable logs, applies market prices, and integrates costs. That's how we move from forest science to forest valuation. This is forest econometrics. Now, here's a question. How many of you have looked at nominal log prices and thought they were rising? The illusion is strong, but when adjusted for inflation, real prices often decline. This is what is called the illusion of value. FRASS makes sure we don't fall for it. It builds valuations on real inflation, adjusted trends, not illusions. This is critical for defensibility. Imagine explaining to a client or in court that your valuation was based on illusion. That's a conversation you never want to have. These look like prices are climbing. In reality, you're looking at inflation. One of FRASS's strengths is the Real Price Appreciation Forecast tool. Developed in 2005, integrated in 2009, and published internationally in 2020. It's a tested, proven method of forecasting log prices forward. This means you can model timberland value of each species, sort and grade, separately and apply price forecasts with precision. Assemble logs across rotations, not just a guess. Your value assembly is anchored with time, so you can express the time value of money as applied to the commodity you are valuing. This is a necessary tool of forestland valuation. When appraisers have this, they stop relying on comps that don't exist, and they start producing valuations grounded in markets. With this tool, I was able to foresee the collapse of the Great Recession as starting in 2006, not 2008 as the rest of the economic lemmings thought. When it troughed in 2009, the route of recovery was forecasted. Recovery to baseline levels would take longer than the decline. But, what happened here in 2001? From 2021 to 2025, we lived through what I call the phantom of the recession. Timber prices stagnated, even declined in real terms, while the broader economy appeared to be recovering. For anyone appraising forestlands during that time, the danger was clear. Without tools like the RPA forecast tool, valuations could be badly misled by what looked like recovery but wasn't reflected in log markets. FRASS allows us to track those disconnects and make sure we never overstate value because of temporary illusions. You may remember the list of our journal articles I shared earlier. Well, one of them, published in the International Journal of Forest Business Research in June 2025, documents exactly this phenomenon. That's where I named and explained the phantom of the recession. The driver is straightforward. The price of logs follows the demand for housing starts. Housing starts require lumber, and lumber comes from our logs. When housing demand stumbles, even if the rest of the economy seems strong, timber prices can lag or collapse. That's the phantom we have to guard against. So the lesson is clear. Without RPA forecasting, we risk mistaking illusions for value. Now let's get technical for a moment. The flex taper model, patent pending, allows us to predict the small end diameter of logs and assign Scribner board foot volume. Why does this matter? Well, because logs are sold by diameter and length, as measured in board feet. This screen predicts price for ponderosa pine logs in eastern Washington and North Idaho. This one shows price predictions for small diameter ponderosa pine. Those are logs with small end diameters of 6.0 to 10.9 inches. If you cannot predict small end diameter of each log, or its SED, you can't value the log. This screen shows large ponderosa pine logs of 11.0 inches SED or greater. That is not given by the FVS program, or any other cruising app on the market today. But it is now predicted by the Flex Cruiser app as applied in FRASS. This is how tree size is translated into value and then into your forest land appraisal. Flex Taper links tree growth directly to mill input, making it the powerhouse of valuation, from tree to stand to year to mill. That's the chain of value. Let's talk more about the Flex Taper model. This is a story that took me more than 10 years to bring to life. The need was clear. While FVS is powerful, it does not predict small end diameters, SEDs, or log lengths in its growth estimates. Without those, we couldn't translate tree growth into actual merchantable logs with the precision the market requires. And remember, we don't sell trees, we sell logs. And those logs are scaled by licensed state scalers, held to strict standards. Early attempts to fill the gap produced numbers, but not with the rigor and accuracy I was after. I wanted a method that could stand up not just academically, but in the real markets, where logs are measured, graded, and sold. That led to Flex Taper, a model that predicts SEDs with the accuracy necessary to merchandise trees into logs. With those projections, log grades align directly to the standards used by log scalers, ensuring forecasts tied to fair trade and real-world market valuations. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office has recognized the novelty of this work. Flex Taper is now officially patent pending. It stands alongside the RPA forecast tool as one of the cornerstone innovations inside FRASS. This slide shows why the Flex Taper is more than just a local tool. It's a national pivot point for timber management excellence. On this map, the green shaded regions, Alaska, Western Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, follow one standard. From the stump, the log is measured up the stem, 32 feet, plus the state-mandated 1.5-foot trim. That's where the cut is made, and that's the log that goes onto the deck. The log that licensed state scaler will measure and the landowner will be paid for. In contrast, everything east of the Cascades, all the way across to New Hampshire, follows a different state standard. There, logs are 16 feet plus 1.5-foot trim. In both cases, it all starts at stump height. That simple but critical point drives how the tree is merchandised, how log volumes are tallied, and ultimately how the forestland value is projected. The Flex Taper model was built to capture these differences, integrating FVS outputs, cruise data, and variable stump height assumptions, so that appraisals reflect real regional standards that define value in practice. Let's walk slowly through how a traditional timberland appraisal is done using the Income Capitalization Approach. Step 1 is to calculate the current rotation's harvest optimum. In forestry terms, this is the age at which you would harvest a stand of timber because of the discounted net returns per acre peaks. Appraisers look for that one sweet spot where growth slows, and the opportunity cost of holding the timber becomes greater than the benefit of continued growth. Step 2 is to add what we call the Faustmann tail. Faustmann's formula, developed in the 1840s, assumes that after this optimum harvest age, the land will be regenerated and produce the same return rotation after rotation into perpetuity. In practice, the appraiser attaches that repeating tail to their discounted cash flow model. Step 3 is to discount all of those expected cash flows back to the present using a chosen discount rate, usually based on some mix of market rates, risk assumptions, or simply professional judgment. On paper, this method looks rigorous. It produces a clean single value estimate. You have biological growth, harvest revenues, a perpetuity extension, and discounting. Yeah, it feels very defensible because you can point to a formula and a chart. But let me point out a limitation here. This method is a static model. It assumes markets are constant. It assumes the next buyer will manage exactly like the current owner. And it assumes that the world stops changing once you've set the rotation optimum. So, the traditional method is not wrong in form. It is wrong in application to forest land that lives in dynamic markets. It gives the illusion of precision, but it systematically undervalues what the land can truly produce. You have been asked to appraise timberland value, not to make pretty good estimates. Now, let's look at the outcome of this traditional method. When you take that current rotation optimum, add a Faustmann perpetuity, and discount it back, you get $744,464. That is the fast appraisal value. Many of you have seen numbers like this in reports. They feel credible because they come from the standard playbook. But there's a problem. This number is blind to reality. It assumes a static price level. It does not incorporate real price forecasting. It does not account for market cycles. When timber values are rising, when they're falling, or when they stagnate. It ignores owner behavior, impatience, short rotations, or alternatively, long-term stewardship. Think about it. This appraisal treats timberland like a bond, with fixed coupon payments. But that's not what timberland is about. Timberland is a biological factory tied to volatile commodity markets. So what does that mean in practice? It means this $744,464 is an undervaluation. It is systematically low because it strips away dynamics that drive real-world value. And here's the critical takeaway. If you rely on this method, you're not appraising the property. You are appraising a frozen snapshot based on assumptions that have nothing to do with how forests actually perform in markets. In a few minutes, I will show you how FRASS changes this picture and why the true value of this forest land is higher, much higher than $744,000. But before we get there, I want you to sit with this. The method most commonly used in the appraisal industry, the one that seems rigorous and professional, is the very thing that is causing undervaluation. This is the FRASS Action Team, the essential roles that work together to produce credible forestland valuations. The Forest Resource Manager knows the land, the silviculture, and the operational constraints. They bring practical knowledge to how stands are actually managed. The Chief Financial Officer represents the financial side, ensuring valuations align with business requirements, accounting standards, and investment decisions. The geospatial analysis provides the GIS framework, mapping stands, roads, soils, and boundaries, so that every valuation is tied to real spatial data. The forest biometrician delivers growth and yield, the science of how trees expand in height, diameter, and volume across rotations. Without this, we have no production base. And finally, the forest econometrics. This is the role of D&D Lyrics. We integrate all the pieces of growth, markets, costs, and forecasting to reach true financial optimality. These are not isolated roles. They interact. The forester and the GIS analyst refine the inventory. The biometrician provides yield, and the CFO tests assumptions, and FRASS ties it all together into a defensible valuation. Together, this team ensures that forestland appraisal isn't just precise on paper, but truly reflects the land's economic reality. Timing is everything. That's true whether you're a land appraiser, an investment manager, or a forestland manager. Look at how these roles connect. Appraisers must rely on the price forecasting if they want their valuations to hold up under scrutiny. Investment managers need accurate asset values for their financial statements. Credibility depends on it. And forestland managers make real decisions every year about when to harvest, when to build roads, when to hold. On the surface, these might look like separate goals, but they all converge on the same answer: the true value of the land. And that is where FRASS stands. It ensures that when timing is right, everyone, appraisers, investors, and managers, lands on the same defensible valuation. This is the bridge between appraisal value and business operations. Actionable decision data begins with the physical foundations of the land. Spatial data and GIS give us the real-world framework: parcel boundaries, ownership lines, road networks, and the stream corridors. These define the working landscape, the constraints, and the opportunities. Without this map-based context, valuation floats in abstraction. Within those parcels, we evaluate timber stands as unique biometric foundations. Each stand is modeled, one at a time. Growth potential is guided by climate, site index, soil characteristics, slope, and intertree competition. From seedlings through maturity, the biometric model shows us the production line of the forest factory, how much volume, by species, by age, will come forward. These models are sensitive, reflecting the biological realities of each stand. And then we bring in econometrics. FRASS layers in the econometric drivers: real price appreciation, delivered log market values, logging and trucking costs, road construction, flex taper SED estimates leading to volume by log, inflation, and discount rates. These transform the biological growth into a financial forecast. Together, these three layers, spatial, biometric, and econometric, make the data actionable. They allow us to move from maps to trees to markets and ultimately to valuation decisions that are transparent, defensible, and operational. Up to this point, we've looked at timberland value from a traditional, single rotation perspective. That's helpful, but it's incomplete. Today, we're not asking, what's the optimum for the current harvest alone? Instead, we're building the full sequence. Multiple rotations in perpetuity. Watch. Here's how it works. Step 1. Current stand. We grow the existing stand forward for centuries, simulating a clear cut each year for the first 10 years. After that, we do it every 5 years for 300 years. Every harvest event generates a full stand table from FVS with 200 plus statistically representative trees. Each tree carries its characteristics: species, DBH, height, and crown ratio, and an expansion factor, which can be merchandised into logs by length and SED, linked in time. Step 2, repeat. The next year arrives. The cycle repeats. Year by year, we establish the full range of possibilities for rotation 1. We are holding on to about 70 potential harvest options for this single rotation. Step 3, rotation 2. Only after the first rotation is harvested do we plant rotation 2. This time we relax the detail. Instead of annual stand reports, we model every 5 years. But we take it forward 400 years. It makes about 70 potential rotation 2 harvest opportunities. Step 4, perpetuity. Now, only after the rotation 2 is harvested can we apply the Faustmann approach. At that point, the land expectation value extends into perpetuity. With 70 options in the first rotation and 70 in the second, that's 4,900 possible sequences, each with its own Faustmann tail into perpetuity. That's 4,900 different futures to weigh before we can identify financial optimum. The power here is that these shuffled harvest optimums only reveal themselves when all rotations are linked together. Until now, we stayed in the realm of biometrics, tree growth, and stand dynamics. We haven't yet pulled the economics lever, but now we light the fuse. Inflation and the forest landowners' impatience. We've now moved beyond the single rotation view. Here, we're looking at 2 full rotations and then into perpetuity. Notice what happens when we introduce the inflation and impatience. Inflation today in the US is running at about 3.26%. But this owner, whom we call Fast Money Eddie, carries an impatience rate of 3.5%. That small difference has profound impact. This is exactly the concept I wrote about in the Growth and Decay article, which I linked to you earlier. It shows the impatience of the landowner bends the trajectory of forest value. In this scenario, we see, on the first timber stand, the current rotation harvested in 2035. The second rotation harvested 40 years later. Then perpetuity rotations continuing at roughly the same 40-year interval. Interestingly, the length of the second rotation and the perpetual rotation converge. They appear nearly identical across all timber stands. When we tally the discounted land value under this impatience rate, the result is $873,769. That's significantly higher than the initial $744,464 we calculated using the FAST appraisal report. $873,769 is the appraised value under the owner's profile. Okay, how can this be? The answer lies in the highest and best use. The principle that the best appraisal isn't always the shortest path to cash. Sometimes, adjusting for impatience reveals that waiting a bit longer yields a higher perpetual value. Now, let's keep the inflation rate constant, but moderate the impatience rate down to 3%. This is a key threshold. Impatience has now dropped below the inflation rate. Here's what happens. The first stand is still harvested in 2035. The second rotation follows 40 years later. But in perpetuity, the harvest interval stretches to 45 years. Across the other stands, the rotation lengths remain much the same as in the previous example, yet the discounted land value tells a different story. The total value rises to $959,047, higher than in the Fast Money Eddie case, even though the harvest schedules look nearly identical. What this shows us is that the relationship between the impatience and the inflation matters more than either rate in isolation. Once impatience drops below inflation, the total asset value increases. And this is the appraised value under this ownership profile. This discount rate isn't some free-floating number we choose arbitrarily. It is tied to the prevailing interest rate environment. And this example illustrates the scenario much closer to what many in the timber industry actually use in their appraisals. Now, let's see what happens when we lower the impatience to 2%, with inflation unchanged. This single adjustment creates a striking difference. The first harvest is pushed back to 2040. The second rotation extends to 45 years. And in perpetuity, the cycle lengthens all the way to 60 years. Other stands follow the same pattern. Delays in the first rotation, then longer cycles in the second, and still further into perpetuity. Here's the key. FRASS evaluates every possible finance return sequence and identifies the highest and best use, the HBU. In this case, that HBU produces a discounted land value of $1.2 million. This profile aligns with a NIPF owner, a non-industrial private forest land owner. For them, forest land isn't just about immediate financial yield. It's about stability and continuity. The returns are valuable, yes, but so are the non-monetary benefits like a camping trip or a weekend of fishing, hunting with the kids. And for many, like me, it's about passing the forest on to the next generation, or two, or even three. That's what lowering the impatience reveals. Not just higher financial returns, but a forest that is managed for legacy. Now we move further down the impatience scale to 1.5%. This is no longer impatience, this is financial patience. Watch what happens. The first harvest still comes in 2040. The second rotation stretches to 60 years. Then, in perpetuity, the cycle extends to 70 years. When we discount those rotations and sum the value, the result is $1.5 million. And this is the appraised value under this ownership profile. Who manages with this level of patience? Indian tribes. On their forest lands, management often looks beyond the next quarter, beyond the next rotation, even beyond the next generation. Many tribes speak of planning for 7 generations. That perspective shapes a forestry approach where the longer rotations aren't just acceptable, they are expected. For these owners, highest and best use isn't about the quickest cash return. It's about creating a sustainable legacy that can be handed down. And in this scenario, the FRASS analysis confirms that the HBO is indeed achieved. This $1.5 million discounted cash flow total represents the appraised value of the property when managed by the landowner with this impatience rate. Now we come to this bigger question. Is highest and best use really about the owner or about the property? We have talked through the spectrum. Start with a quick turn mindset where the forest looks like $744,000. Add impatience at 3.5% and the value climbs to $873,000. But the rotations burn short. Ease that impatience to 3% and the value rises to $959,000. Yet, still it leaves money on the table. With 2%, the forest produces $1.2 million, a balance more in line with non-industrial private forest land owners. And at 1.5%, the patient, long-term view, the forest delivers $1.5 million. The forest hasn't changed, only the landowner's horizon has. What we've revealed is that the property itself has the biological capacity to deliver far more than the short-term perspectives suggest. But the actual value depends on the lens of the owner, their impatience or their patience. That's the heart of the HBU question. Are we measuring the property's potential or the owner's horizon? So, what does it really take to bring all of this together? It starts with the forester's growth data, the raw measurements from the field. Heights, diameters, crown ratios, stand density, all the details that define how a forest grows and yields over time. Without that biometric foundation, nothing else works. When we bring in the FRASS market engine, this is where numbers meet the economy. We watch those trees against log prices, apply the RPA forecast tool to project price cycles into the future, factor in logging and hauling costs, and discount those cash flows back to today. That's how biological growth turns into financial value. But the data and the market engine alone are not enough. You also need the forestry consultant and appraiser, the professionals who can interpret the results, determine the highest and best use, and, importantly, defend those conclusions in front of the decision makers, auditors, or even in court. That expertise ensures the analysis stands up to scrutiny. And finally, the most important part, the owner or investor. With FRASS, they are no longer making choices on intuition or guesswork. They are making empowered decisions, decisions grounded in real, defensible value. You want to be able to explain it. We've talked through the logic, the tools, and the possibilities. Now it's time to move from conversation into demonstration. The preview and demonstration site is built on the former Pack Forest example. It's a working model of FRASS, not just screenshots or mock-ups, but a live environment where you can explore what the system actually does. You've seen how it works in theory. The demo lets you see it in practice. And for many people, once they see it, they want more. More information, more detail, and the ability to actually use it on their own forest lands. That's exactly why the demonstration site exists, to give you a taste of how FRASS performs before we scale it into your specific properties. You already work with foresters you know and trust. FRASS isn't here to replace them. It's here to amplify what they do. The system takes their growth data, tree measurements, stand tables, yield projections, and transforms it into market-ready valuation. That means appraisers can take biometric outputs from any forester, port them directly into FRASS, and generate consistent, defensible valuations. It's the bridge from forest measurements to market value. What foresters provide is essential, but FRASS adds the missing link. It connects those measurements to market valuations, integrates real price forecasting, and applies net present value calculations across multiple rotations. The result is an appraisal product that is transparent, defensible, and fully auditable. The kind of product that stands up to professional scrutiny and is delivered for a professional fee. My goal today has been to show you a new way of looking at forest land value, one that is rooted in biology, connected to markets, and defensible under appraisal standards. Whether you apply FRASS directly or simply take these concepts into your own work, my hope is that you will use this framework to make stronger, clearer, and more meaningful appraisals of the properties you analyze. This is how we bring rigor and credibility to forest land valuation, and how we ensure these forest lands are measured, managed, and valued for what they truly are.